and it's in 2 rooms, actually. When you walk into the room off from this area, you'll see the beginning of it. But please walk to your right, and you'll see more of her artwork. She is going to be doing some talks while her exhibition is up over the next couple of months. It's always been a pleasure to partner with Michelle Gibson with Wine and Words. And we've been doing this for what?
This will be our 5th year.
Right. Yeah, so it is a pleasure. So I can't wait to hear the dialogue between the 2 of you, because I know, because that's the questions that you asked, and I know how dynamic Sharon Draper is. So thank you so much, Sharon, too, for coming and being here.
Thank you, Ms. Sharon Draper. So welcome.
Well, thank you.
So what I discovered is this is our first time meeting.
Okay.
But I'm very familiar with your work. So when I was with Black Issues Book Review, this was back in 2000. So you know Adrian Ingram, who was our associate publisher then.
Yeah.
And we did our first young adult issue. This is how I came to know your work.
I know I remember the name. When you said that, I said, I know that.
Right. It was right after Max Rodriguez had launched the Harlem Book Review.
Okay.
And then, which was HBR, I think they had kind of given it the acronym. And then a magazine company out of Virginia started Black Issues Book Review. And we just kind of exploded onto the scene. And I was lucky enough to be their director of advertising when they were just starting. So those wonderful, 5 years when literature was good, and everybody had a book deal, and it was wonderful, and there were Black books everywhere. So tell me a little bit about how you got into writing.
I was a teacher.
Okay.
And so I was always a writer, but I was a teacher of writing, not so much a practitioner of writing. Occasionally I would write with my students, but mostly I was a teacher of writing. And what happened was I had a student who challenged me to write something.
Wow.
But it wasn't one of those real nice kids. It was like, hey, you think you so bad, why don't you write something? And so he gave me an application for the Ebony Magazine Writing Contest.
Amazing.
And I had no intention of doing it, but I eventually did. I wrote a little story.
Okay.
And won first prize.
Wow.
So that's how I got started.
That's your application. So what made you leave the classroom?
I would like to say it was because I was so very successful.
Of course, of course.
I had so much money. I had enough years to retire.
Okay.
So
Timing was everything.
I was able to get out.
Okay, okay. And so Stella by Starlight is because I looked on 2 different websites and I got 2 different counts. So I don't know what number of book this is for you.
I don't either.
Okay.
I really
It's
don't.
a lot.
It's a lot. Of novels and books, it's probably 25.
Okay.
Maybe 30. I have 2 books of poetry that I published myself, but I count them.
Yeah.
And then I've got 2 books for teachers, and so it's pretty close to 30.
Okay, I had you at 32. So
32 is
okay.
close. I like that better.
Okay, that's good. That's good. So why the young adult market?
I don't think I could write for adults. People ask me all the time when I'm going to write an adult book, and I don't think I can. I really like kids.
Okay.
I like children. I can hear their voices.
Gotcha.
And because I taught young people for 25, 30 years,
Right.
I still have a feel for them.
Okay.
I actually liked them, and I taught them on purpose.
That's key though, because that's not every teacher's story.
No.
Yes.
No.
I mean, that is very key because I have a counseling degree, and so when they're teaching you to learn your population, you have to actually go and be with them. So there are segments that I was like, I don't like them.
I don't like it. So I like teaching. I like kids. It's not that I don't like adults. I just think kids are more
Sometimes
interesting.
I don't like them.
I just think kids are more interesting, and I like their stories. And I once started a book about a husband and a wife who were fighting, and they were about to get a divorce, and it was traumatic, and they were yelling and screaming, and they had a 14-year-old daughter on the other side of the room who was listening to the parents argue. I was more concerned about that 14-year-old girl.
Right.
I didn't really care what happened to the parents, but I was
Yes.
worried about that 14-year-old girl.
And that's how you know.
Yeah.
That is your calling.
Mhm.
The interesting thing, now Stella is making a lot more sense to me, because I thought Stella was you.
No.
But she makes more sense to me because there are aspects of you in Stella.
There's probably aspects of me in everything.
Okay.
Somewhere
Okay.
in there, bits and pieces. I'm probably that very efficient teacher
And I wasn't even really that interested in the teacher as much as I was interested in Stella. The title is very key. So this is a beautiful Miles Davis song.
Yes.
So how did you connect his music with your writing?
Not at all.
Okay.
Really, and I wanted it to fit. I love the song
Okay.
"Stella by Starlight," and I wanted it to fit. I printed out the words,
Mhm.
and I said, "Okay, I have to somehow make the words of that song fit in here." This is a book for children.
Yeah.
It's a grown-up song.
It is a very grown-up song.
It would not fit.
Okay.
The title it's called "Stella by Starlight" because my grandmother's name was Estelle.
Oh, nice.
And they called her Stella. And my grandmother used to go outside and write at night, like the little girl in the story. So
okay.
it's named from a grandmother.
I got you.
And the starlight is, well, lots of things happen to her in the book
Yeah.
at nighttime. So it's based on, if it's me when I was a 10-year-old girl on my grandmother's farm.
Paying attention to your grandmother and
Yeah.
what she was going through and
Yeah.
what she was remembering, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. What I like about Stella, and Stella is, she's a lot. She's a handful. She's very spirited. She is not disrespectful at all, but she knows herself and is continuing to learn herself, which I thought was really interesting, because there are aspects when her character is challenged and she automatically knows what she's going to do. But then there are other aspects of the book where people are trying to tell her who she is, and she's like, I'm not that.
Yeah. It's hard to develop a character who has spunk
Yeah.
and personality. And you want to make her likable so that when kids read the book,
Mhm.
they say, I love this little girl,
Mhm.
I'm cheering for this little girl, I want this little girl to succeed. So it's hard to build a character that goes from point A to point B. They have to grow.
Right.
They have to change. And so it's not always easy to write and make the character do that.
Okay.
So I struggle with it a little bit.
So let's talk about a little character development before we get back into the plot of the book. When adult writers talk about how they come up with a character, I've heard everything from using applications at McDonald's so that you can, get a depth and a breadth of the character that you're creating, or that it was more organic and that the character just kind of haunted them at night and they had to write this person and they automatically knew what this person was going to do. How did you come to give Stella the dynamics that she has?
Sometimes a character comes to me like that,
Okay.
where I have a character in my mind and I must give birth to this child.
Okay.
But most of the time, writing a book is like being pregnant. You're not real sure what you're going to come up with. You just hope you got a pretty baby.
What a perfect analogy! You can just hope and pray on that baby, okay?
It takes a good 9 months to make it work and make it good.
How long did it take you to write Stella?
Couple of years.
Wow.
Couple of years.
Wow.
Yeah. So she was a work in progress for quite a while.
So she's set in North Carolina,
Yes.
and it's an interesting period. So I'm assuming that most of your readers, this is a historic novel for them.
Yeah, for just about everybody. 1932
Yeah.
is historical fiction for just
Well,
about everybody. Yeah.
when I say it that way, it's So I've heard the stories from my parents.
Yeah.
I don't know that this generation has a storyteller. Okay.
They don't know. This generation doesn't know storytellers. They don't know storytelling unless they sit down and listen to the older people in their families. And I tell kids, I said, I want you to go and listen to the old people in your family. Listen to your grandma, listen to your grandpa, talk to them, ask them questions.
Right.
And when you said earlier about me, learning from my grandmother, I didn't.
Okay.
Because I didn't know that it was important. I was 10.
Right.
So I didn't know that listening to what my grandmother had to say was important. I absorbed it, but
Right.
I don't know if I consciously focused on it.
I'm smiling because I want to know if it would make a difference.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think any 10-year-old.
If someone said, you should really pay attention to your grandmother right now because everything that she's saying is going to be important to you later.
Well, at least they can say that somebody told them.
Gotcha.
They can say, that lady told me I should talk to my grandma.
Right.
It never occurred to me to talk to grandma.
Right,
So
right.
that, at least somebody has told them that. Nobody told me that talking to my grandparents was important.
Right.
There's some things that the older people won't talk about.
Right, which
It's
is most of the stuff that's in the book.
Yeah, so now I don't want to talk about that stuff.
Right.
A lot of times they won't. My grandmother on my mother's side would never talk about her past.
Really?
She just refused to talk about it at all.
Wow.
Must have been very painful, but she said, nope, we're only going to talk about it today. We're
Yeah.
not going to talk about it a long time ago.
I think that what adult readers will get out of this, I'm not sure, and you're more in tune with your population, but what I think adult readers will really grasp from this is that there was joy in the midst of the despair, and because it's coming from this child, you can't help but turn the page. So when something dramatic happened in the book, because she's a child and she's still haunted by it, but she'll go play and she'll want to have a different experience. You flip the book and there is a different experience to it, which makes digesting all of the bad things that happened during this period not so impalatable. Like it's you can chew on it.
It's through the eyes of an 11-year-old girl, not from an adult that has seen much pain. It's from an 11-year-old girl that's wide-eyed and amazed. And, oh, wow, look at that. Ooh, that's terrible. Ooh, I wonder what we'll do.
Right.
And so she is experiencing these things for the first time. And I made it so that it's seen through her eyes, not through the eyes of an adult who would have a completely different point of view.
Yes, and I enjoyed that. I mean, especially with all of the things that we have of storytelling of this period. What I think some authors or writers do, I don't know if I want to say incorrectly, but what makes it a challenge as a reader is that you get beat up with things. And life had to have had moments of peace and moments of joy, even in the midst of the chaos.
Well, the thing that I remember from when I was a little girl was the strength of the community. This is based on my grandmother's town.
Actual town.
It's
Okay.
based on this. Bumblebee, North Carolina is 100% fictional, but it's based on my memories of the small town that my grandmother grew up in. And the thing that I remember is the sense of community, the sense of closeness, the sense of everybody depending on everybody else. Everybody knew everybody's business. Everybody knew who was doing what.
Right.
Everybody
Right.
knew everything.
Right.
But there was a strong sense of community. It was
Yeah.
a strong sense of we are family and we are for each other.
Right.
And whether it was a wedding or a funeral, there was a sense of closeness of all of the people there. And from the time that I visited as a little girl to the time that I took my children when they were little, to the last time that I visited there a few years ago, that same sense of community.
It's kind of timeless in that. I love the mother. I love Stella's mother. She was such a caring person. And there were two comments that I took note of. One, the husband had asked her something, and that didn't catch me as much as her response, which was, I trust you with everything, which I thought was amazing for a mother character to say in the midst of all the stuff we have in books these days.
Yeah, she trusted him, but she made it real clear what she felt.
Yeah.
She said,
Yes.
Because he said, I'm getting ready to go vote. And she said, do you know how dangerous that is to my family if you go vote in the midst of this?
Right.
So she made it clear, but she let him make his own decisions.
Yes.
And he told her, I have to be a man. I've got to prove and show that I have to be a man. I have to feel. And she knew that that was important for him to do, for him to feel. And she let him have it.
And I think that because you can tell their relationship was based on this type of love and respect, I guess. Because when you read characters in marriages, they're not necessarily respectful of one another.
Right.
There's no opportunity to voice disagreement without it being animosity.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when Stella finds out that her friend Paulette, well, not really a friend, but that Paulette's mother and father were constantly fighting, it was hard for her to understand that. It's like, like my parents have been, they kind of go at each other sometimes and they disagree about things, but my goodness, to have actually, physical altercations between the husband and wife, that was just beyond her comprehension. And because I wanted to build a loving family unit for her to live in, because she needed to have the love of a family, which is surrounded by that love of a community. And that's the core of the book.
The three antagonistic kind of things that I saw in the book, and I probably missed some. One was the Klan. The second was just the environment, the snakes and just, the environment in which they lived in. And the third was despair. And you kind of felt it, you didn't feel it when Stella was in school, but you kind of felt it in the community that there was a fight to keep hope and a fight to be hopeful in the midst of all the things that was happening.
The adults in the community worked hard, and they didn't have good jobs. They had menial jobs. They worked at the mill, and they weren't allowed to use the saws. They were the ones that did the sweeping at the mill, and they were day laborers. And when they got up to get dressed in the morning, they put on their aprons and their work boots. So there was a difficulty, but in the real community on which this is based, I saw those same people go to those hard jobs when I was a little girl. But at night, they would come together and they would tell stories on my grandma's porch. And so all the hard work and the harshness of their life, which really didn't change from generation to generation to generation, but it was erased just a little bit every evening when they were able to, or maybe it was just Saturday night, I don't remember. But when they were able to come together and sit on Grandma's porch and tell stories and just talk about each other and, tell jokes and have that sense of family. And that's what got them through generation after generation after generation.
So when children read this book, what is their first reaction? Or any of your books, because you have a variety of settings, but you're a teacher in your books.
When kids read this, they like Stella, and that was my first goal. And I tell them, I don't care if you understand what happened in 1932, because it really isn't important. The fact that the father stood up and took a stand to go and vote, that's important. But the fact that it happened in 1932, I don't care that you know that. I want you to understand Stella. I want you to cheer for her. I want you to follow her on her path. Stella has trouble writing. I want you to see how she gets better as she struggles and works at it. If they follow Stella, they will learn so many things that they don't know they learned. That's what I do. I teach kids without them knowing that they learned anything. And I'm very good at it.
You are. As I was reading the book, I was like, if I was a teacher, I would use this in the classroom because you go through history, and a lot of kids struggle with writing. So, or if it wasn't writing, if writing wasn't the subject that they struggled with, they could relate to it. Exactly. And the fact that she's scratching things out and having to rewrite things, and that she loves math and she loves reading, like all of that was very relatable, and the teachers teaching in the book made me want to do the things that she was asking Stella to do. So when Stella got in trouble for not completing her assignment, I felt bad for her. I was like, you better write your assignment. So I could see how kids will enjoy learning and not learning, the disguise of it all. So this is my last question, and I'll let you read, or we can take questions from everybody else. But with this honor that you did your grandmother, what is the takeaway that adults should have for this book?
Adults, we are old enough to know how important it is to learn from the generation before us. Kids have to be told, but we should know better. And we have to value the old people, listen to their stories. We need to videotape the old people, while they're still lucid, and have them talk. I videotaped my father about 10 years ago, and he just talked and talked and talked and talked for hours about, and a lot of what he talked about ended up in here, about what it was like when he was a little boy. So this is his childhood all mushed up with everything else. And so adults, I think, need to remember that we are built on our past, and if we lose that, we've lost everything. And this generation that's coming up, we're losing that connection to the past, and they're not told, and so they don't care. And so
that's the connection that's been broken.
Exactly. And that is what we have to go back and fix, that connection with the generation before us and the generation before that, because these generations to come, they're not getting it. There's a break somewhere.
And so, and I said this is my last question. So the art of storytelling and remembrance. Because a lot of what we have been told may be fictionalized, right? So a lot of that is, being kind to the past and being kind to the person who is telling the story. As adults, do we have a storytelling time? Because I had a grandmother similar to yours, and her home that they lived in, there was no electricity, so we had no other choice but to sit around and tell stories to each other. There isn't a TV and a Wii that's distracting. So how do you, as a parent, create that space where it's entertaining and palatable for your children to hear your stories, or do you just make the space?
I think at this point we need to make the space. I really do. These things have off buttons.
Right.
They need to do. I have nothing against. I have one of all of those. But there are times when we need to turn them off. We need to sit them down and sit them on our lap and read to them. And even if you can't remember a story from Grandma from a long time ago, they're all written down in books. Read the stories. Get the Virginia Hamilton stories. Get the Ashley Bryan stories. Get all of the old stories, and read to the children so that they will know. And if every single parent would sit down with every single child and read to them. And we always talk about reading to the little ones, like the little baby back here. It's important to read to them when they are, 2 and 3 and 4. It's also important to read to them when they are 14 and 15 and 16.
Really?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. When I live in Cincinnati where we have real snow. I have to say that. They got 10 inches. Perfect. They had 10 inches at home.
Oh, my goodness.
But sometimes they would have a snow day, and a snow day was a day where sometimes they would have like half snow days, and that was a day where the buses didn't run, but the kids, school was open. That way they could count it as a legal day.
Gotcha.
And so half the kids would show up. And on those days, they would be reading days, and I would read to them. And the seniors were like, read it some more, read some more. Read
Really?
I would read stories to
amazing.
them. These are 14 and 15
That's
and
amazing.
16-year-olds, and we would have reading days. They love snow days
Right.
because they knew that I was just going to bring a book and we would read. Can we stay for the next class? We're just watching a movie.
They're sitting on the edge of the book,
Yeah.
trying to listen to what comes
Exactly.
next. Yeah.
Read to the older children. Sometimes you have to tie them down with a chain or something.
Right.
But read to the older children too. They need to hear your voice.
Gotcha. Gotcha. I used to take my nephew on trips up north, and we would stop at Cracker Barrel and rent a book on tape, and we'd have to listen. And I remember we would get to like a bathroom stop, and he would say, "I shall wait. We're not at the end of the chapter,
Yeah.
so hold on." So I can certainly appreciate that, and that love for older children to hear the voices, because I think the movies and the inanimate objects that they are tied to keep them from the creativity of what that voice sounds like.
The real thing.
Yeah.
We're listening.
All right, I'm gonna share it, Sharon. I'll have this talk all day. Are there any questions?
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. I'm a retired high school librarian, and I'll have to tell Ms. Draper that students like an author when they take the book. They don't have the time. They don't have the time to check it out, but when they take it, and I go, yes, hands of a timer so many times and so excited. But I'm not one of those people who care the book came up missing, because I wait for a child to take a book
Yes,
and to take
yes.
anything else.
Yes.
And that's when you know that they love that author. So it's wonderful. They say children won't read, but children will read.
Yeah.
They will. And they will steal a book.
Backwards compliment.
That's the best problem to have, right? The most stolen library book.
That's a true measure.
Do you have a passage that you would like to read for us?
Tell me what you like.
Okay, so
I got some marked that I like to read, but you tell me what.
I like Stella's writing. So I particularly like Truth. That's page 67. That's page 67.
She knew I was going to ask.
Michelle.
Oh, put the mic down.
No, move it.
Okay. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. This is our cinematographer. Is that okay? Oh, perfect.
There we go. Okay. Stella is struggling with the writing, and I'll read a little intro to it, where she goes outside at night to write. Now, my grandmother went outside to write also, but my grandmother went outside to write because that was the only time she could write, because they made her quit school. Stella goes outside to write, to try to get it right, to try to practice. The night sky was an inky blue-black blanket strewn with thousands of crystal bright stars. A half moon added even more light. When she was satisfied that all was well, she sat on the second step and reached under the third, searching deeper and deeper until her fingers found what she was searching for. She pulled out the school notebook that she'd stuffed under there after school, as well as a package wrapped in a piece of worn leather. Inhaling the rich animal smell of it, she unwrapped it slowly. There lay Stella's treasure, an old cigar box. She lifted the lid, the scent of tobacco wafting out, and sifted through the items inside. Dozens of yellowing and curled newspaper articles she'd torn from Papa's discarded newspapers, from news stories not pasted on the wall. If you remember those pictures from the 30s, there are pictures of the cabins, and they all had newspaper on the walls. Partly that was insulation to keep the cold out, but partly it was because it was words. And those words were on there. They read those words. And when the paper started getting yellow and peeling, they pasted more paper up there. This newspaper, it was words. They could have put something up there that wasn't words, but they purposely had words all over those walls. And they said, well, these people don't read. They had the words on the walls.
Right.
So Stella's father was a reader of newspapers, and so she clipped out articles, and she liked nonfiction writing, and she liked articles, and these are articles that she had clipped that she kind of liked. And there was one about a lady named Amelia Earhart. She flies all by herself in a small plane across the ocean. Another one about two men named Laurel and Hardy, who were famous for being a funny comedy team. And more, Amos and Andy are famous for being funny also, but they are played by white men who pretend to be Negro. The color paper explains this part. A man named Hitler from Germany has lots of soldiers following him. He calls them stormtroopers. Someone kidnaps the baby of a man named Charles Lindbergh. The baby dies. Lots of people have no jobs because of something called the Depression. A man named Roosevelt promises to fix that if he is elected president. And then she collects the local stories too. Miss Irma Thorndike wins first place in the Miss Corncob contest. Clifford Eubanks gets arrested for being drunk on a Sunday. Dinah Lee Dixon grows the biggest pumpkin in the county. It weighs 33 pounds, 7 ounces. So she discovers that the world is bigger than Bumblebee, and the world is bigger than her little town. And she wants to write this, and she just can't. She just couldn't seem to get it right, this writing thing. She did most of her homework with JoJo at the kitchen table. That's her little brother. But she practiced her writing at night. She didn't want her family to know how she messed up. Mama and Papa, of course, expected her to bring home good grades in every subject. Finally, Stella opened the notebook to a fresh page. Taking an idea from her father's newspaper that morning, she wrote just one word on that page: truth. The whole rest of the page was an ocean of white, double ugh. She chewed on the pencil. She made curly cues of each letter of truth. Then she made a decision. If she was really going to write with honesty, she ought to start, like Miss Grayson said, with herself. She gripped the pencil so tight it made a mark on her middle finger. Took 5 tries to get it right, 5 balled up sheets of paper, 5 pages of anger and mess ups and erasures. When she finished, she rubbed her eyes, sleep began to creep in. She read it over one last time, not really satisfied, but it was the truth, even if it still had some scratch outs. So this is what she wrote, and the way I put it in there, I included the scratch outs. So she starts off, my name is Stella and I am me. She scratches that out. My name is Estelle and I am somebody. She scratches that out. My name is Estelle Mills and I am not nobody. Mrs. Grayson would say that's a double negative. Well, I'm here to say I'm not no negative. I am me, and that's a fact. I like to be called Stella because it reminds me of stars, and I like the night. Mama tells me I was born at midnight during a full moon. Maybe that's why. I am left-handed, the only student in the whole school who is. My family reminds me of good things to drink. Mama is hot chocolate. Papa is black coffee. JoJo is sweet tea. Me, I'm the color of rum. Mama cooks with it sometimes. I got thick black hair, bushy caterpillar-looking eyebrows. When I look in the mirror, I don't see pretty. I just see me. Besides, sometimes things that look pretty, like secret fire in the darkness, are really pretty ugly.
Do you have anything else you would like to read?
Anybody else have any other questions? Don't get me started. Okay, I'm going to read the snake section.
Okay.
Now let me tell you something. I'm not scared of snakes. A lot of people are afraid of snakes, but my husband was a biology teacher, and so I don't want to marry one. I don't want to sleep with one, but I'm not afraid of them.
Right.
You know, they don't bother me. I don't bother them.
Exactly.
We stay on, you know.
Exactly.
So, but snakes were a part of the world, and there's several mentions in the story about where snakes like to hide, and you know, there's snakes that it's just part of life if you live in the country.
Mm-hmm.
There are snakes. So, and Stella's mother had even warned her about snakes when she had taken her out collecting herbs and showing her how to pick the right kind of seeds, the right kind of berries, and that kind of thing. So on this particular day, Stella is coming home from school with her brother, and the dog who usually waits for them down at home had come all the way up to school to meet the kids, which was very unusual. The dog ran ahead of them, urgency in his yelping and the rapid wagging of his tail. The dog's acting peculiar, JoJo said. At that, Dusty barked again and broke into a trot. Stella and JoJo jogged behind him. Once home, the dog leaped onto the front porch and flung open the front door. Mama? Papa? No answer. The house was empty. This morning, Papa said he was taking the mule and going apple picking, but where is Mama? The dog is barking more insistent now, ran past the children and around to the back of the house. Come on, Jojo, Stella said. Something's not right. They chased after Dusty through the backyard, through the woods, towards Kilkenny Pond. Jojo spotted her before Stella did. Mama! He shrieked. Their mother lay curled on the rain-soaked ground, not far from the jumble of dead willow branches, a mess of vomit beside her. Several dark brown honey mushrooms spilled from her herb-collecting basket. As Stella approached, something moved in the undergrowth, earth-colored. Was that a snake? Stella felt an eerie calm come over her. She rushed to her mother and squatted beside her. She saw what had happened immediately. There were 2 small puncture wounds on her mother's left ankle. They bled just a little. Stella turned to Jojo, who had started to cry. Slowly, carefully, she told him, "Go get Dr. Hawkins. Tell him Mama's got a snake bite. It's bad. Then go find Papa. You know where the apple orchard is. Now run." Wiping his nose on his sleeve, Jojo dashed off. Stella turned back to her mother, who was blinking slowly. Her breathing was uneven, raspy. "I'm here, Mama," Stella said. "I'm going to take care of you. You hear?" Stella looked back to the house. There was no way she would be able to carry her mother that far. She leaned close to her mother's ear and whispered, "I'll be right back, Mama. Don't worry." With that, she darted back to the house. She grabbed a couple of old towels, her father's Sunday necktie, a half bottle full of whiskey that she knew her father kept hidden under the bed, a faded dress she'd outgrown, 2 blankets and a pillow. Then she filled a bucket full of clean water. It took longer to get back because the load was clumsy, the bucket was heavy, and she didn't want to spill. Her mother was lying just as Stella had left her, but she was trembling now. Her ankle was beginning to swell. "I told you I'd be right back. I'm here now," Stella crooned as she lifted her mother's head and placed the pillow underneath it. Stella first poured the cold water on the wound, watching as the oozing blood turned pale pink. Mama's eyes opened wide, registering shock, but Stella just kept rinsing the holes in her mother's leg. "Next thing I'm gonna pour might hurt a little more," she whispered, "but I gotta clean it as best I can." Stella had no idea if she was doing the right thing or not. She was pulling from a gut instinct she didn't know she had. She opened the bottle of whiskey, and as she sloshed most of it on her mother's ankle, her mother cried out in pain. Stella simply said, "Shh, it's gonna be all right." Mama stilled. Stella held up the pale blue dress to her face. Mama had made it for her when she was 6. The cotton had been worn soft from dozens of wearings and washings. Without a second thought, Stella ripped it into wide strips, which she wrapped loosely round and round her mother's leg. She secured the bandage with her father's necktie, then bundled her mother in the blankets. She soaked a piece of the torn dress with the last of the water and placed it gently on her mother's forehead. There was nothing else she could do, so she snuggled under the blanket, wrapped her body close to her mother's, and held her tightly. It would be dark soon. Where was the doctor? Where was Papa? She began to pray.
Miss Sharon Draper, thank you so much. This is so wonderful. Thank